Hi, welcome to Artistic Spirit. I'm Katie Moran, and this is your place for art, mental health, and spirituality. And I'm here today with Leah Jones. Leah, thank you so much for coming. Leah is an author, poet, mental health advocate. Her first book was a collection of poetry on mental health titled Semicolon, and her second book on mental health awareness and workplace stress titled Listen. So Leah, thank you so much for coming today. I want to get into a bit of your origin story. I know your English teacher suggested that you should write poetry as an outlet. Could you share that story?
Yeah, of course. First of all, thank you so much for having me. My English teacher, Melanie Henderson, she has been an absolute godsend. Essentially, with my studying for my A levels, I had a lot of recurring nightmares from the stress of it all, and I'd gone to other teachers saying I was really stressed with all the work and all the study, wondering if they had any revision tips for me. And she was the only one that really sat me down and gave me all these revision tips. And after I told her about my nightmares, she suggested that I put it all out on paper and I try poetry. And that was when I wrote my first poem, She's Here. It's essentially about my nightmare was about this faceless woman crawling and creeping around in my bedroom. It was really freaky. Um, but getting it all out on paper, with that first poem, it was almost it was like a massive weight was lifted. And it sounds really cliche, but once you get rid of that burden and you get it all out on paper, you do feel lighter.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I'm so glad that you had that experience because I enjoy your poetry. And I think
Oh,
it
thank you.
it has such a great message to it. And I think sometimes in your poetry, you put words to things people are afraid to say. And I think there's more, like we'll get more into that later, but I just really love that about your poetry. So you've mentioned in features before, because I featured you on my company page and on Summation 52, my poetry platform. You mentioned in features before that you hope to impact young people on stress, depression, and anxiety. What message do you have for them?
The things with teenagers and young people, we're all told the same thing. It's a phase. You'll grow out of it. We all get stressed, get over it. And for some people, the tough love is great. For others that are a lot more sensitive, they start, you start climbing within yourself. You're not told that it's okay to feel how you feel. Everyone feels like that, but everyone's coping mechanisms are completely different. Someone might choose the gym or music or painting. I've chosen literature and poetry, and I think it's really important to show teenagers and young people that there are really healthy ways of coping. You don't have to lock yourself away. You don't have to turn yourself inside out to try and deal with all these issues on your own.
Yeah, and I think that that's really powerful how you say it's a choice. Like coping mechanisms are things that we choose. Like we are in control of that. And the more coping mechanisms we have that are healthy, the healthier we become and the more healing can take place. So I specifically think about like the idea of self-harm because I used to self-harm, and you do have some like self-harm is in some of your poetry. So what would you like, what kind of like coping mechanisms would you suggest for someone who is using self-harm as a coping mechanism?
With with self-harm, it's such a taboo subject, and I think a lot of people choose to sweep it under the rug to the point where you will have a rug with a massive mountain over it and you will start falling over it. People don't recognize that there are many different forms of self-harm. There's the more for lack of a better word, traditional self-harm, which is cutting. But people don't realize that excessive dieting, excessive eating is a form of self-harm. Pulling your hair out, telling yourself that you are worthless, it's all a form of self-harm. What I would say to that is it depends entirely on how you self-harm. If you're one of those people that looks in the mirror and points out a million negative things about yourself, I say write a gratitude journal. I started writing one and it has really helped me. I choose one thing that's made me smile that day, whether it's something good that's happened or whether I've just seen a dog with a raincoat. One thing I like about myself. And sometimes I really do have to think, sometimes I think, well, actually, no, I do like my eyes. They're not grey and dull. I do like them. Or no, I do like the shape of my ears. It's something specific, and you really do learn to love yourself. Excessive dieting and eating, if you're one of those that says, oh, if you comfort eat, for example, maybe try comfort eating something else. If you're one that reaches for the ice cream, maybe go for a non-dairy or a strawberry. Don't go cold turkey, just choose an alternative. For an excessive dieter, to be honest with that, I'd go and maybe choose nutrition. Go for a protein shake. You're not eating it, you're drinking it. So, and then with cutters, specifically physical self-harm, what I would always say is never go cold turkey, because that's when you start, not really sure how to explain it, but going cold turkey for something that you use as a coping mechanism, it will drain you. What I would say to that is put an elastic band around your wrist, and every time you feel the need to self-harm, just ping the elastic band on your wrist, and you'll find that over time you'll ping it less and less, to the point where you won't even put it on. But I always say to everyone, definitely try a gratitude journal and just list all the things that have made you smile, and maybe one thing that's been a challenge. And then you start writing it every day, to the point where you only write it when you need to.
That's beautiful. Yeah, for me, I think what really stopped me from self-harming, I got to a place where I really saw that it was harmful, and I really had to have that moment with myself. I really wanted to self-harm, and I had this jade roller. I don't know if a lot of people do it with the lymph drainage. Yeah, and I had a rose quartz one, and I just thought about that, and I just rolled it on my arm, and it was just so cooling and grounding. And I really realized that we have the choice of how we react to ourselves, and that we can have compassion even if we feel self-destructive thoughts or an urge to self-harm. And I think it's really powerful how you bring up a gratitude list, because I think so much of self-love is having gratitude for what we actually have, and realizing that we are worthy of that gratitude. And I think a lot of times for me in the past, I think when I've been depressed, it's harder to access gratitude as an emotion. And I think with anything, I think Amen Clinics does a research study, and someone who did a gratitude list for 30 days, it helped with blood flow. So their brain actually developed and changed. So I think that's a really great a really great coping mechanism, and also that you recognize that coping mechanisms take time. So like I think like sometimes like therapy can help with like coping mechanisms, but also like at the same time, if you're stigmatizing yourself for being in therapy, it can like have like counterintuitive like aspects to it. But going deeper into a little bit of what you said about like dieting and kind of like the idea of like body shaming, I want to talk about that idea and like self-consciousness. The line in your first book reads, "When I look at myself, I see a girl ashamed of herself, ashamed of her body, ashamed of it all. When I look at my reflection, I see nothing but imperfections." So I personally have suffered with body dysmorphia, disordered eating, and have been cyberbullied about my body. So I can relate to these lines. Like they really resonate in a very deep way. What would you say to a young person who feels this way, specifically like in terms of the pressures of social media with people looking a certain way and presenting kind of like edited pictures, whether it be like their body or just kind of like presenting like body images that are somewhat like unattainable? Like what would you say to someone who like sees like themselves as like less than or imperfect because of like social media exposure?
I think the thing with body consciousness, I mean, it's still something that I'm struggling with, and I think I'll always struggle with it. A few years ago, I went vegan and I lost loads and loads of weight. And even then, I thought I was fat, and when I look back on pictures, I think I was I was too small, and I thought I was huge. And then looking back on pictures of me in university, I thought I was huge then, but I'd love to be back to that size now. And I'm sure that if, God forbid, I should get any bigger, if I do put on more weight in the future, I'll probably look back on pictures of myself now and think, oh, I'd love to be that size again. I think with self-consciousness, it's not something you can necessarily teach someone to cope with, but just learning to love small details about yourself will definitely make a huge difference. I mean, even now, I still look in the mirror sometimes and I think, oh, you know, I could lose a bit. And I look at pictures of friends, of family members, of celebrities, and I think they look absolutely amazing, but they're probably dealing with their own body conscious issues, and that's something that I do have to remind myself of. For example, I was watching an interview with Rebel Wilson, and she used 2020 as the year of health. She lost so much weight. She looks absolutely fantastic. And she was saying she actually got a lot of backlash from her team, her production team, for wanting to lose the weight. And Adele as well, she's had so much backlash from losing all that weight, and I think she looks absolutely fabulous. And it's one thing you have to remind yourself with all these edited pictures on Instagram and Facebook and in magazines, that they're not real. They're absolutely not real. What you see in the mirror is real, and they probably do go home and think, I really wish they hadn't edited those pictures and shown the real them as well. So I think it's, with that poem in particular as well, what I wanted to sort of mirror was Shakespeare's sonnet, "Should I compare thee to a summer's day?" And he compares this woman to all the imperfect things in life, but it's her imperfections that make her perfect, and that's what we all need to learn. It's what I still need to learn.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I'm vegan now. I had like this experience where I choked on steak, and I like had wanted to go like vegan for the animals for like the longest time, because I felt like this like recurring guilt, because I was vegetarian for 6 years and then I went back to eating meat. Um, yeah, and I just like felt like there was just like so much like pain that animals endured. And like when I went vegan, I haven't lost any weight. I think I've been vegan for like 7 months. And like it did help me kind of like feel like my body is kind of like a sacred place. Like it's like I don't like let in like things that like this sounds so weird, but death, like torture,
Yeah.
cruelty. So like for me, like that's which like helped me. And like I think if someone like criticizes my body, which did happen to me on social media, someone saw like a picture of like a cheesecake, and this like still stays with me. They said like, I hope that's not fattening. And like that stays with me. And like I think like for anyone listening who doesn't think through the things they say to other people, like your words could hurt someone. And like just being just being kind in what you say to people like does have an impact. And for anyone who's going through like whether it be like cyberbullying about your body or what you're eating, like as long as you know you're living your life in a way that like feels good to you, like that's like enough to get you through like that, and that you are stronger than any hate anyone can kind of like throw at you. um so yeah, like for me, I think the way you like talk about like seeing your imperfections as what makes you like beautiful in like your own right, like I think that's so beautiful. um so thank you for that.
Thank you.
I want to discuss in your first book how you bring up suicide. I've been there so many times. I like to remind people who are there that there's always hope, even if you can't access it. What would you like to remind people in these moments? What has helped you come out of that place?
Then with that in particular, it's unfortunately I was very much alone in pulling myself out of that place. I was in a horrendous work environment. Um, it started when I was diagnosed with alopecia areata in 2018. And essentially what that means is my hair falls out in different places in my head. It's an autoimmune disease, and my white blood cells attack my hair follicles, thinking that they're foreign bodies. And all this side of my head was the patch was enormous, and I was really ashamed of it, and it got so big I needed to wear headscarves. I was fitted for a wig. I love my wig now. She's called Evangeline. She's beautiful. Um, but the workplace I was in, it was I was called a gypsy for wearing a headscarf. I'd wear big earrings to take the attention away, and I was called a gypsy for it. When my hair started to grow back, it grew back white at first, and I was called Roots for that. I wore sunglasses with my black headscarf, and I was called a fly. Why a fly? I don't know, but and it was insane to think that I was receiving this much grief in a workplace, and my my team leader was really helpful with it, but it didn't go any further, and I really wish it would have. And part of that is my fault as well, because I didn't insist on taking it any further. There was one woman on my team in particular who would tell people I didn't even know that my hair wasn't mine. I was wearing a wig, and the longer I stayed in that workplace, the more I was subjected to bullying. And I often say to people, I don't like using that word, I think it's a strong word, but I've come to realize, no, I was bullied for my alopecia. It was awful. I had steroid injections in my head, but my patch was so large, I had to have them in separate sessions. So my first session, I think I had about 6 or 7. And the second session, I think I had there's another 7. I had about 16 injections into my head altogether. And thankfully I didn't need the third session. But the amount of, people don't realize the amount of pain that goes with those injections. And another person in the workplace would try and touch my head when I'd be in this much pain. I think, who wants to touch my head on a normal day? Not when I've had injections into my skull. Anyway, and then it got worse and worse. In that workplace, if you're not engaging in the office gossip, you are the office gossip. And I went to HR a couple of times looking for help with stress. And I got sent a link to Samaritans. That was all I received, a link to Samaritans. And this particular HR person is supposed to be a mental health first aider. No. And I'm not the only person to leave that job because of poor mental health. I know of 2 others. And it's insane to think that they probably don't have any more measures in place. With all the workplace stress, I had a breakdown and I was hospitalized. And I'm still waiting for my counselling. 2 years later, on this Sunday coming, it will be exactly 2 years. And I'm still waiting for my counselling. And I think lockdown really helped with that. Straight after coming out of hospital, I went straight into a new job. And a year of being in that job, I took a month off for stress. I decided, no, no job is worth the hassle. And I think that's what people need to realize, is that no job is worth your mental health. If your job puts you in hospital, no, get out. Get out. If your job makes you think of going in hospital, get out. Simple as. If your job only sends you a link to a charity for workplace stress, get out. There are other jobs, get out. And I think while lockdown was a massive burden on a lot of people's mental health, for me it did help, because it made me climb out of that hole on my own.
Yeah, I think in terms of being hospitalized, because I've been hospitalized before, I think you expect it to be something that, okay, I'm going to get the help I need. I'm going to get like attention and for people to like help solve the ways I'm struggling. And so much of it isn't like that. There's not that much therapy. A lot of it like is a wake-up call, because you see kind of like how you saw that wasn't the right place for you. Like I saw like things in my own life that just didn't feel right to me, and like I took action when I got out. But yeah, sometimes being hospitalized can be a traumatic experience. Did you find it traumatic at all?
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's important to put out there as well that a lot of people say that feeling like that and putting yourself in that situation is selfish. It's not. It really isn't. At no point are you're not thinking of yourself in that regard. You're thinking everyone and everywhere is better off. I'm better off. And when you're actually in that moment, it's so eye-opening. And it was I was only in there for one night, but it was enough of a wake-up call and a kick up the bum to really sit down with my own mental health and think, no, the only person that can get me out of this now is me.
Mhm. Well, that's an empowering thought, that like you have the power to do what's right for you. And I'm glad that it was a wake up call. I've done like longer stays in hospitals, and I personally I felt stigmatized by a lot of the staff. But I would say like I think like it was so helpful to be around people who were also suffering, because much of society tells us that we can't suffer in public, that it's not like there's no safe space to suffer. You have to
Yeah.
kind of like go outside of society to do that. And I think like the hospitals are this place where it's great for crisis, because you get to see other people who feel the same way as you do. And that's a very validating experience to know that you're not the only one going through this, that other people have sometimes been through worse, that other people find it like this is the worst experience they've ever been through. And you can really like when you see someone who's in like the worst spot they've ever been in their life, like there's like a special bond that you like have with that person after that, because like kind of like how strong they are. And you like seeing someone's strength and courage in a situation where they're like finally accepting help is really encouraging. And I think for anyone who has ever been in a hospital, like I think like everyone I've ever talked to, like they did say like they felt stigmatized, that it was traumatic. But like I think like if you have to go to a hospital, like it's better that you like have your life saved and you get help and you get resources, then and I think that's more important than the kind of like cost of feeling stigmatized. So I just wanted to kind of like reiterate that in this podcast. And then talking about that, I do want to ask about, in terms of workplace stress, what can employers do to help their employees overcome that stress or reduce it for them?
I think what a lot of workplaces do is they say they have these mental health first aiders in place. And I think it was so shocking to just receive a link, to the point where it just got easier to just pretend that I was fine. Um, with I'm in a brand new job now, but the job I went to after that, the awful place. After I'd been off for a month, I had a talk with my supervisor, and I'd been telling them over and over again that I was stressed and I was overwhelmed. And she did help me. She took on my took over some of my emails, took over some of my more urgent deadlines, but it still wasn't enough of help, and I was still being not criticized, but sort of told off, that even though I had all this work that was far too much for one person and certain things were being missed, it was still my fault. It wasn't their fault for overloading me with all this work. And it was only after I had the month off that they must have thought, okay, this is really bad now. And I did feel a lot better after having the month off. And the one thing that the employers don't do, and I think this is very important now that working from home has become the norm, is that there were no sort of morale boosting things. Like there were no team meetings over Zoom, like a quiz night or things like that, which is something that my current job do through lockdown. Um, there's no sense of team anymore. They don't. I'm trying to find the words to explain properly. There's just no sort of drive to be a team anymore. And in terms of workplace stress, there's no glaringly obvious signs are being missed by employers. Um, in the firm that sent me the link to Samaritans, I was a very vocal team member, and then one day I shut down. I went completely quiet, and at first they thought, "Oh, she's just having a bad day," but then that led to another bad day, and another bad day, and another bad day, and not once did they ask what was going on, how I was feeling. It was just, "Oh, well, she's clearly very boring at the moment. Let's focus on that and why she's boring." And certain certain signs like that, they can't be ignored. Like someone who normally engages in like workplace activities of a weekend, if they suddenly stop going, you need to ask why. And I think what a lot of employers need to do as well is an online suicide prevention course. I took one and it took 10 it was 10 minutes out of my life to do this prevention course. And a lot of it is based on workplace stress, and some of the signs that they show, I thought is absolutely mad just how obvious these signs can be, and they're ignored like they're nothing. You're like, "Oh, he's quiet today, but that's fine. Oh, he's not eating his lunch today. He's probably just not hungry. But he didn't eat his lunch yesterday. Maybe he just doesn't like lunch." And it gets to a point where it builds and builds and builds to the point where you may not see that employee again, and you need to recognize that they're probably taking their work home with them and screaming into a pillow on a nightly basis because you're not doing your job as a mental health first aider.
Yeah, and when you say that, it does make me think of I forget what it was, but it was like maybe like 10 years ago someone said about like there are signs that you can look for if someone's suicidal, specifically a friend, but like the number one thing you can do is ask someone if they're thinking about something like that, and help refer them to get like the help from a professional that they need, if they are. But like I think sometimes we do kind of like you said, sweep it under the rug, and we think like we make assumptions to make it okay when someone might not be feeling okay. And I think like I personally think if when I was like suicidal, if someone who wasn't that close to me asked, I I wouldn't be offended. Like I don't think I ever would be offended by someone asking if I was in a place where I felt suicidal. Like I think those questions always come from a place of solidarity,
Yeah.
and I if you're worried about someone, you can always ask, and um for me, when I had my first suicide attempt, my friends called, I was in college, and they called the like health, there was like a health team, like a mental health team. And I had like my first session there, and that's when I started therapy. But they didn't know that I attempted suicide. They just thought I was acting differently. And they had like an intervention, and they said how much they cared about me, and that they wanted, because I would just isolate myself alone in my room and I started acting weird. Um, they like really said that they cared and that they wanted me to get help. And I think like, if you ever ask if someone is okay, like you don't have to be afraid to ask, because it's always better that, like, kind of like the whole phrase, like you want to prevent things and you don't want to like try and like retroactively solve them. And like in terms of suicide, like there's nothing you can do like if you don't prevent it. Like you really have to like think about prevention, because that's something that like no one could ever take back. And there is so much hope. And even if someone feels like that way, like if it's like a lot of the times like it is stress and pressure, and that like can lead someone to depression and suicidality. And there's a lot of ways that there's a lot of outlets, like kind of like poetry, like you said, painting, for some people exercise. Like there's always something you can do to decide to get better, and make a step toward healing. So I love how you just bring up how you really like bring up that you wish someone had asked you if you were okay. Because I think there's like a climate of people not wanting to offend someone, and people asking how are you but without really asking. So yes, it's very interesting that sometimes we overlook the simplest of things. Like if you want to know if someone's okay, ask them if they're okay.
Exactly. And I think it's very interesting what you said just then, like people think that they'll be offending us if they just simply ask, are you feeling suicidal? It's like, well, no, we're not offended by it. We're actually um grateful that you've noticed that something is off. And it's the same with my alopecia, for example. Instead of pointing, staring, laughing, calling me names, ask me about it. I'm extremely open about it, and I don't mind if someone asks, you know, why do you need a headscarf? Why do you? I mean, obviously now my hair's grown back, so I won't get questions why I'm wearing a headscarf. But um, I wish people had just asked me. I had when I used to work in an arcade back in Rill. Um, I met, I saw two of the regular customers on the train. I was on my way to work from a doctor's appointment, and one of them actually asked me if I had cancer. I thought, that's what if I had it? You don't ask someone if they have that horrible, horrible disease. I was so gobsmacked. It was like, I don't know how to, no, no, I don't. But why have you asked that? And I think people are so ignorant to the way they say things. And I think that's why I think ignorance is what genuinely concerned people are afraid of. And I think that's why they don't ask the important questions of, are you feeling suicidal? Have you been self-harming? And I think that's what people need to learn, the difference between genuine concern and just plain ignorance.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you pointed that out, because there are things that are extremely offensive, and then there are things like, I think it really comes down to, like, are you asking because, like, are you asking from a place that you want this person to, like, be as, like, healthy as they can be, and to, like, stay, like, for them to, like, stay alive? Or are you asking because you just, like, don't understand, like, what it means for them, or like the cultural impact? Like, I think of, like, um in terms of, like, racism, like someone having, like, microaggressions towards someone, and, like, sometimes people ask things, like, and it's not, like, to, like, understand whether or not someone's, like, well-being, like, are they impacted by it? And I think, like, kind of like the center of, like, whether or not something is offensive is, are you prioritizing that other person's well-being?
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree.
So along the lines of workplace stress, I do want to ask you, if an employer does not take action on anything for an employee's workplace stress, what do you think the employee can do?
Um, I think it depends entirely what is causing your workplace stress. For example, for me, it was an overwhelming amount of work, and I decided to take myself out of that situation, and I decided, no, actually, I need time off. I've been working myself absolutely sick, to the point where I was even working on a Sunday afternoon, and my boyfriend Daniel would walk in and say, What you do that for? You're not getting paid for it." And I'd say, "Well, it needs to be done." And he'd say, "Well, who's helping you with it? No one. Well, why are you doing it? Why are you doing that to yourself?" And we had a long weekend off together, and I came into an alarmingly amount of emails, and I sat on the sofa and I cried. And Daniel came in and said, "I'm not having you go into that place again. You need to take yourself out of that situation." And it took a while for those words to actually sink in. And I thought, well, actually, yeah, I don't need to be back in that place. I am going to put me first for a change. And I had the month off. And I think it's so important to be able to do that for yourself. And I think what a lot of employees do, and I said this to my supervisor at the time, she asked me if I feel that I can say no to a task. And I said, no, I can't say no. I'm there to do a job. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, no, you can say no if you feel like you're overwhelmed with tasks and work. You can say no. If your employer then criticizes you for saying no, you take it higher. If that person criticizes you for saying no, you take it even higher. If they criticize you, you take yourself out. If there are no people there to help you say no, then you need to move. You need to take yourself out of that situation.
Yeah, and you mentioned this earlier. Specifically, I just want to say it again, your mental health and well-being is your priority.
Exactly. No job is worth your mental health decaying. Your employer, if your employer can't recognize the toll it's having on you and your mental health, if your work puts you on medication, if it help you deal with the stress and anxiety and depression, etc., then are you in the right job if it's put you on medication.
Yeah. And I think so often there's like this societal pressure to not ask ourselves these questions, like, is this the right place for me? Um, and I think it's not a commonly held belief that our mental health and well-being are a priority. And so many times society tells us a different message. And I really hope that in the future these kind of like narratives change, and that like a lot of people reframe their mindset and do like prioritize their health and well-being and ask themselves the questions that promote their health and that allow for them to find environments in which they can flourish and thrive.
Exactly, and I think what a lot of employers do as well is that they're so quick to nitpick and criticize certain certain aspects of your work, but a lot of the time we're not praised and rewarded for the hard work that we're actually doing. For example, um, in the firm I worked for, the um, I'm trying not to name names. The first firm I worked for, um, my last day was supposed to be the day of the Christmas party, and HR contacted me and said, as of 5 p.m. that day, you're no longer an employee, so you're not invited. And to me, that was a real smack in the teeth because I thought, I've given you 2 years of my life. I've made the company so much money in that meantime, and you can't spare £50 for a Christmas meal for me to say goodbye to my team and my colleagues. That it was just such a kick in the teeth for all the work I'd done for them. And I thought, I'm obviously not appreciated at all. And that's when I realized I'd made the absolute right decision to hand in my resignation and to leave.
I'm really glad you took the steps that were right for you, and that you really, I think this is kind of like shows that you can be an example to other people who might not have the courage to do that or might not think that's the right decision. Yeah, because if we stay in the wrong place too long, we really don't allow for ourselves to go to the right place. And I think that's something that we all really would benefit from, especially like these kind of decisions aren't selfish, because if you are in the right place with like where you're working or the decisions in your life, like you bring that energy to your relationships with others, you bring that energy to like your work, and if you like write outside of work, you bring that to your writing, and I think that's really a gift. So kind of like making those decisions that I think are labeled as selfish allow for us to be selfless in our actions after we make that decision.
Exactly, and it was all those manifesting feelings that led me to write Silence Should Speak, and it's definitely one of my more powerful and better written pieces of work because it's that sort of twist, like my silence will speak, and you can twist that to be and it to resonate with you however you want. For me, the silence um is basically an empty chair where I would have been sitting if you'd have listened to me, if you'd have observed, if you'd have helped me when I needed help. And now there's an empty chair, and that the silence coming from that chair should now speak volumes to you.
It's a powerful message.
Thank you.
So I just have one more question about your poetry. So you've written through loss. How has that affected your writing or helped you process emotions?
It's bereavement is it's something I don't wish on anyone. I don't think anyone would wish it on anyone. But in January 2017, I lost my nana. And then 5 days later, I lost my granddad. So it was my mum's mum and then my dad's dad. And it was one of those moments you absolutely couldn't write it. It is the absolute hardest thing I've ever had to go through. And I didn't know who I was grieving for because it all happened so fast. I lost 2 grandparents in 1 week. I went to 2 funerals and gave 2 eulogies, stared at 2 coffins, and I just remember being completely numb. And it only ever I mean, I'm perfectly fine, like, now talking about it, and as I had to learn to teach myself that it's okay to go to my mum for um if I'm having a bad day, because it was her mum. I sort of told myself, well, I can't go to her because she's grieving the loss of her mum. I can't go to my dad because he's grieving the loss of his dad. And um, I had a panic attack that sent me to hospital. And my mum said, well, why didn't you come to me? I said, well, you have your bad days. And she said, "Well, and? So who am I if you can't come to me?" And that really resonated with me. And that's when it started coming out more and more that I needed to deal with these bereavements. And for some reason now it only comes out on Christmas Eve. We go to my grandparents' graves, and that's when I let out my it's a ghastly noise that comes out of me. It's this wail of emotion that comes out, and it putting that wail onto paper, the more I go visit their graves, the smaller that wail becomes. And it's through putting it all out on paper how angry I was that they'd left. I was particularly very, very close with my nana. I called her my glamour nana because everything she wore had to sparkle. It was beautiful. And at first I remember feeling anger towards her because she'd left. And then it was anger towards the universe for taking her away from me, and anger towards the doctors for not detecting the cancer when she'd gone back and forth. They told her it was a water infection, it was stress, you need to go on holiday, you're fine. She wasn't fine. And it was this immense amount of anger that I had rising inside of me that caused these panic attacks. And getting it all out on paper was just, it was like never mind a weight being lifted, it was a boulder, a mountain being lifted off me. And it was just, if I didn't have my poetry at that point, I don't know what would have happened. At that point, I really do think that my poetry saved my life. And I wanted to save other people's lives.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. And every time I talk to any poets who also happen to be mental health advocates, I think it's very we're all in agreement that like poetry is life-saving.
Yeah.
And art in general. I think that's something for artists. Um, I know a lot of artists, and I think they would say the same thing, that it gives them purpose and it's healing and therapeutic. Um, yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for all of this. I would like to kind of switch gears now and ask about your self-publishing journey.
Thank you so much for creating this platform for us all to share our stories with you. Thank you so much for sharing
Oh, thank
yours
you.
as well.
Thank you.
I just wanted to take a moment to say that self-publishing is, oh my days. I think with self-publishing, it's very, if you're in it for the money, then don't self-publish. If you want to be J.K. Rowling, then unfortunately I don't know what measures you can take. I think you'd need an agent and an actual publishing agency. Essentially what I started doing was I joined this writing community called Kahana, and for me it's such a simple website. It's essentially a split screen website sort of style, and I started putting all my content into there, and the community that comes with Kahana it's so beautiful. It's a proper little family, and you can probably find them on Twitter and Instagram, either Kahana, or you can find Adam and Jonathan on there as well, the creators of Kahana. And what they've created is essentially, for me, I call it the Emerald City for writers. It's such a beautiful community, and just being able to organize all my poems onto Kahana, um, it actually shaved about 18 months off my date of bringing out Semicolon, which was amazing. I didn't think I'd bring out Listen for at least a year. To do it in less than a year was insane. With actually going on to self-publish, it's honestly it's so simple. I'd recommend having your own copyright page for a start. I don't have one in Semicolon, but I do have one for Listen, and so you can create it however which way you want. If other writers if you want to copy my layout of my copyright page, go ahead. It's perfectly fine. It's because it's all personal information in there anyway. So by all means, copy the layout. It just gives you an idea, and then actually going on to publish the manuscript, all you need to do is type in Kindle publishing on Amazon, not in the actual Amazon thing itself, into Google, Kindle publishing Amazon, and they do it for you. You upload your manuscript, you choose your pricing, and it shows you what royalties you would get if a certain amount of books have sold. But again, if you're in it if you want to make a load of money off it, it's not the way for you. But for me, it was all about getting the message out there. So the royalties really don't mean a lot to me. You can upload your own cover photo design, or they have specific designs for you to choose from as well. And it really is so simple. I think when I was publishing Semicolon, I think I just Googled, how do I publish on Amazon? and it all came up, and it's such an easy step-by-step guide.
Awesome. Yeah, that's what I use too. Kindle Direct Publishing has an amazing resource on kind of like, they have like drop down menus, and it's like, how do I do this? How do I do that? It's a lot to read,
Yeah.
but it's all you have to read. You don't have to do anything outside of it. So for anyone who's looking to publish there, it's a great place. And just remember that reading instructions are always helpful. Okay, thank you so much, Leah. I really appreciate this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thanks.